Peace is the ultimate luxury asset, a depreciating illusion sold to the uninitiated while the sovereign elite quietly accumulate the instruments of kinetic leverage. We have entered an era of undeniable hegemonic friction, a paradigm where the $19 billion influx of venture capital into defense technology is not a geopolitical tragedy, but a brutally rational market correction. For the last 3 decades, global markets gorged on a pacifist delusion, assuming the previous Cold War dividend would stretch into perpetuity. It was a period of systemic naivety where capital was diverted into frictionless, frivolous consumer software, while the fundamental architecture of global power was allowed to atrophy. Now, the pendulum of history is violently swinging back toward hard power, and elite capital allocators are positioning themselves to harvest the profound wealth generated by the next global conflict. You are witnessing the $19 billion war premium, a massive reallocation of liquidity toward the startup ventures and conglomerates building the future of sovereign defense. This is not about patriotism, nor is it about the moralizing theater of global diplomacy that consumes the retail public. It is strictly about asymmetric arbitrage. When nations fear for their territorial integrity, the elasticity of demand for lethal technology drops to zero. Governments do not negotiate on price when their survival is on the line, creating a sovereign-supported monopoly that renders traditional civilian enterprise utterly obsolete. The investors sitting in the quiet rooms of high finance recognize this undeniable reality. They understand that the defense sector is no longer a bureaucratic backwater dominated by bloated legacy contractors, but the ultimate frontier of wealth generation. By capturing early equity in autonomous weapons systems, hypersonic materials, and advanced battlefield analytics, they are essentially buying call options on global volatility. As geopolitical tensions escalate, the valuation of these defense assets will multiply exponentially, turning global instability into a highly predictable, fiercely guarded revenue stream for those possessing the foresight to invest. This is the end of the pacifist delusion. Observe the rapid, unapologetic militarization of Silicon Valley. For years, the brightest minds in technology squandered their intellect optimizing algorithmic dopamine loops and food delivery logistics. Today, those same elite founders have realized that consumer applications offer fragile, easily disrupted margins, while the theater of war offers the most impenetrable economic moat on the planet. They have traded the superficial prestige of social media dominance for the absolute power of lethal autonomy. Venture capitalists who once publicly shunned military contracts to appease progressive shareholders are now aggressively funding drone swarms, satellite targeting infrastructure, and artificial intelligence designed exclusively for kinetic engagement. This shift is driven by a singular, unyielding truth regarding capital allocation. Consumer markets are deeply saturated and endlessly fickle, but the Department of Defense wields an insatiable appetite and a virtually limitless treasury. Securing a massive billion-dollar government procurement contract is the equivalent of acquiring a license to print currency, insulated entirely from macroeconomic downturns, inflation, and retail consumer sentiment. Modern defense technology companies are not simply selling hardware. They are establishing proprietary ecosystems of warfare, integrating software and hardware so seamlessly that the sovereign state becomes completely dependent on their continuous upgrades. Once an artificial intelligence targeting system is integrated into a military hierarchy, ripping it out is practically impossible. The vendor dependency paradigm is absolute, creating lifetime customer value metrics that dwarf anything achievable in the civilian sector. This is why the sharpest funds are deploying billions of dollars into these militarized startup ventures. They are actively anticipating the inevitable modernization of the armed forces, positioning themselves as the toll collectors on the newly constructed highway of algorithmic warfare. When conflicts erupt, these private entities will dictate the technological superiority of nations, wielding leverage that transcends borders and democratically elected leaders. It is a ruthless pivot from civilian complacency to the harsh, lucrative reality of defense supremacy. The Valley has chosen violence, and the returns will be astronomical. The intellectual core of this $19 billion strategy lies in the mastery of dual application arbitrage. Historically, civilian technology occasionally found its way onto the battlefield. Today, the paradigm has entirely inverted. The most lucrative technological advancements are now born in the crucible of sovereign defense, rigorously tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable, before ever being sterilized and sold to the masses. Elite capital allocators understand that funding defense technology is not a niche bet, but a subsidized research and development pipeline for the next generation of civilian monopolies. Consider the autonomous navigation systems currently guiding lethal drones across contested airspace. Once the government has financed the perfection of this software, bearing the immense financial burden of initial development, the underlying intellectual property remains securely with the private conglomerate. That same combat-proven code is then repackaged to dominate civilian logistics, commercial aviation, and autonomous terrestrial transport. The civilian market is no longer the primary objective. It has been relegated to a secondary revenue stream, a mere afterthought that provides additional liquidity after the principal profits have been extracted from the defense sector. This mechanism effectively forces the taxpayer to underwrite the risk of advanced-tier technological development, while the private investor captures 100% of the exponential upside across multiple sectors. It is an exquisite structure of asymmetric arbitrage, minimizing initial capital exposure while unlocking infinite scalability. Furthermore, dual application technology provides these defense companies with a veneer of civilian utility, allowing them to recruit highest-level engineering talent who might otherwise harbor ethical reservations regarding weapons manufacturing. The narrative is meticulously sanitized for public consumption, branding lethal innovations as broad technological progress. But in the boardrooms where true power resides, the hierarchy of value is perfectly understood. The military contract builds the impenetrable fortress, and the consumer application merely paints the walls. This is the dual application advantage, an elegant strategy for absolute economic domination. We now arrive at the sovereign imperative, the ultimate realization of how the global elite secure their legacies amidst the accelerating deterioration of global stability. Geopolitical friction is not an unfortunate accident. It is a permanent structural feature of the international order, a fundamental driver of demand for kinetic capital. Those who possess wealth and intend to keep it do not waste their energy advocating for utopian peace treaties or participating in the hollow theater of international disarmament. Instead, they allocate their portfolios to directly capture the financial runoff of imperial collision. They recognize that the capability to inflict overwhelming destruction is the only true currency respected by sovereign states. By owning the proprietary systems that guarantee national survival, elite investors elevate themselves above the jurisdiction of any single government. They transform themselves from mere participants in the economy into the vital architects of state power. When a defense technology startup enterprise reaches critical mass, integrating its autonomous solutions deeply within the military apparatus, it ceases to be a traditional corporation. It evolves into an indispensable organ of the state, shielded from regulatory scrutiny, immune to antitrust legislation, and guaranteed an endless stream of fully mandatory funding. This is the apex of wealth preservation, anchoring your capital to the most primal instinct of human civilization: the instinct to survive and dominate. As we look toward a future defined by resource scarcity and territorial disputes, the $19 billion defense boom is merely the opening phase of a much larger, massive trillion-dollar supercycle. The lines between private equity and national security have permanently dissolved, leaving the retail class completely exposed to the whims of great power competition. You are faced with a stark, unforgiving reality that leaves no room for emotional hesitation. You must recognize the macroeconomic shift occurring directly beneath the surface of the mainstream narrative. You can either choose to own the arsenal of the sovereign state, positioning yourself to thrive amid chaos, or you will inevitably become a financially devastated casualty of it. The architects of tomorrow are buying the global conflict today, securing unassailable wealth while the ignorant masses pray for peace. There is no middle ground in this final transaction. The sovereign arsenal is open. Proceed with absolute and calculated ruthlessness.